Good morning. It is just amazing to be here to tell you how the fact that I took a break and my co-author took a break actually produced something that we think is good. Just like this fox is taking a break, hoping to have all the energy to keep going, or this person is having a nice cup of coffee because maybe it was a long day at the office. It's time to rest, or like they do in big cities where, or and small towns also, where in the central square there's a bunch of benches and people who are doing nothing but resting and watching other people go by. I love that, and I love what this guy is doing, just resting up. According to our tradition, even God rested up on day 7 and took a sabbatical day that was the Sabbath. And from that Hebrew word, we still have the word sabbatical, which is what I did in the fall of 2019, resting up from my job as professor at St. Mary's University to rest up, to freshen up, on the condition that I would publish a novel. And that was the deal, and I'm delighted to come back and report on what happened as a result of that sabbatical break. What happened is I wrote a novel, and with me here is the co-author of this paper, who was the editor of that novel, would like to tell you about the Internship, an engineering ethics novel that as a professor I got to use in one of my classes. And this happened this semester that we're about to finish during the COVID-19 pandemic. My co-author today of this paper is the editor, is the book editor, the novel editor. So good afternoon, I'm Rafael Moras. I'm a professor of industrial engineering at St. Mary's University, and I'm one of the main editors here at Academia Journals. And with me, Annie.
Good afternoon. My name is Annie Alegre, and I am also an editor at Academia Journals, and I'm happy to be here and explain our process.
There we go. Thank you. By the way, Annie is my daughter. So this was a very, very special thing for me as book author, book writer, to have the best possible companion as my editor. So thank you, Annie, for everything you did. And let's tell him. How's that?
Let's do it.
Like I said, I live in San Antonio, Texas, professor of industrial engineering at beautiful St. Mary's University. Through the years, I've taught engineering ethics. I've taught a class called Engineering and Society. I've taught another class on engineering systems, in which we study societal effects of engineering. And I've taken a liking in writing case studies, like short 2-page, 1-page case studies in the areas of Six Sigma, Lean, ethics, and again, tech and society. In the past, I wrote 2 novels in the Spanish language, in my native Spanish language. One is called El Encuentro, and another one is called Tejadillo. And by the way, Annie, I want to tell our audience that you're working on one of those. What are you doing for one of those?
So I'm actually in the process of translating one of these from Spanish to English, so be on the lookout for that coming soon.
Translating and editing, so thank you for that. Anyway, let's keep going. The need for a novel stems, at least in my area, stems from the success of a couple of novels. One is The Goal. It's a novel that we continue to use. I think this is from 1984 or so, and we continue to use year in and year out at St. Mary's University and many other programs. And this is a novel used in computer science, software engineering. Again, it's a novel, but illustrates many of the intricacies of being a professional in the area. We used the novel in my engineering systems management class. That's the title of the class, which I taught in spring 2020, 17 students. And I asked permission from the leadership at the university to use the novel, which in January was still a draft. It was a very good draft. It was ready to go, but we figured, let's use it and let's see what happens. With trepidation, that was a decision made with trepidation, not knowing what to expect. The class has three major components. One is systems thinking, like systems of systems, like what's the role of an airport in San Antonio and what's the role of the airport in Texas and how it interacts with many other things. It has to do with Lean and Six Sigma quality, and it's got a major component, engineering ethics. And that's where I thought the novel would be appropriate, ethics, but also in systems thinking, in having the ability to relate the problem at hand with the system where it actually resides. Since this is an engineering ethics model, I wanted to use a framework. And one of the many codes of ethics it's a beautiful one found by the American Society of Civil Engineers. It's a 4-page document that gives the reader guidelines on what to do in specific instances during the practice of engineering. This is a very open, flexible, general code of ethics. It does not go deep into civil engineering. It applies to, I want to think that it applies to all engineering professions. And we used it very successfully in class. One of the characters in the novel, without spoiling the book for you, her name is Annie Sue, and she gets into decision making all the time, and like the other characters. And I asked my students, what do you think she should do, or what is it the appropriate, the ethical decision to be made, given that she's facing this particular set of circumstances. So I would ask these students to elaborate on that. Upon Annie's recommendation, we have end of the chapter questions that facilitated the process of reading and going deep into the material. I remember talking to Annie during, after 2 or 3 weeks in the semester, and telling her, Annie, this is the best class I've had in the last 10 years. This is an amazing class. Everybody talks, everybody wants to contribute. I planned for a 30-minute session, a 45-minute session, and we end up talking for an hour and a half, and we run out of time. And it's one of those classes in which we hit the end of the session and the students say, hey, let's keep going. So that was an amazing feeling. 8 weeks into the semester, we hit spring break. And of course, another big thing hits us, the COVID-19 problem. And St. Mary's, like most other universities in the nation, says to the professors, you got 1 or 2 weeks to get ready. We are going online. And I remember talking to Annie saying, there goes our group discussions, there goes the incredible warm feeling I had every session. This is how we started. This is a Zoom screen with maybe 60 or 70% of the participants with their video being displayed on the screen. And 2 or 3 weeks after this, we went from this kind of interaction to this kind of interaction, with only one of my students actually showing her video. And I remember again telling Annie and some other friends, this is a disaster. There go my discussions. However, there was a happy resolution. Back in April, I thought I still had the best group in 10 years, as far as discussions, as far as the book coming alive. And I'm going to invite Annie to tell us a little bit about her experience editing the novel. I realize I haven't told you much about the novel. That's because that's about to come. Annie, please go ahead.
Sure, yeah. So starting off, you know, when my dad the author first asked me to do this, of course, I had no idea what to expect. I have no background in book editing, book writing, except for just, you know, courses, things I've randomly done in my life. So next slide, if we can, go ahead here. But thankfully, once I got into it, I was really able to bring in my backgrounds to actually, I think, bring in some valuable information. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Above all that I tried to do, you know, I'm editing my dad's work here. What I tried to do was stay in line with this goal I had, which was how can we get the content and this whole product of this book to be in line with what I saw as these three major important things. One, of course, the St. Mary's core curriculum, which kind of oversees all of the courses that happen at St. Mary's, the more specifically the engineering ethics syllabi, so things that my dad has written as part of, hey, I want my students to learn this. And on a broader scheme, and very importantly, the ethics and values promoted by the National Society of Professional Engineers. So my goal, what I tried to pursue was how can I, again, weave the content of this book through these important topics and nail that and get that into the book. So let's go ahead and go into the next slide. So my background comes from several different places, but primarily as an industrial organizational psychologist, which is my official training, as well as I did some time serving as a career advisor, and it happened to be at St. Mary's University. So with both of these experiences, I felt very well equipped to actually be able to gauge, you know, what can we include in the book? What should we include in the book to, again, be kind of aligned with those three goals that I previously mentioned, those three aspects. So let's go ahead and go into the next slide to give you an example of that. So for example, being a career advisor, I had a lot of experience working with college students, and I did get to kind of gauge what their level of knowledge just about random things is. So for example, my dad had initially written the words HR in the book, and I said, well, let's go ahead and actually spell that out as human resources the first time, because although it might seem apparent to many people already working in the field, that's, for example, an acronym that a lot of college students, they're not totally comfortable with. It might be their first time reading it. So that's a learning opportunity that we put into the book. So you can go ahead and next slide. There it is, spelled out for you. And then as another example, let's go into the next slide. Again, bringing in my experience as a career advisor and industrial organizational psychologist, my dad was talking to me about this idea he had of this guy in the book. And this guy, he's just unprofessional. He has sweat stains and, you know, just not the kind of person you want to see in the office. And my dad described all these aspects about him, but go to the next slide. In the book, he wasn't presented with as much detail. I mean, yeah, he was disgraceful, but it's just a guy, you know, working in the office. So I went back and suggested to my dad, as you can see in the next slide, let's go ahead and bring in that detail. Let's make it apparent how miserable it is to be around this guy, mostly stemming from body odor, physical appearance. You might think that that's, you know, maybe that's not specifically listed as an STMU core curriculum objective or from the syllabi or these associations that are so important to list ethics and values and principles. However, I know after especially conferring with my dad that this is a value we want to instill in our students, the people who read this. We want them to know that it is important to have a good physical appearance, to be very professional looking in the workplace. Sometimes body odor is a weird thing. Oh, maybe we don't really talk about that in the classroom. However, from career advising, I know that that is something we talk about. It's important because in the context of interviews, you don't want to be bringing up a bad impression with an odor or poor appearance. So again, with collaboration with my dad, we really tried to make sure that these aspects were brought into the book. So next slide. Again, I tried, as an ultimate thing here about editing, I tried very hard to not change the context of the book. Rather, it was just kind of fleshing out things that, again, I thought back to those three main aspects that I wanted to stay in line with and highlight certain things from the book. And ultimately, we can go into the next slide. I think by doing this, we wanted to showcase to the students that the world around them is not black and white. Next, but neither is it just gray. It's not just gray and detailed. It's not a big gray line. Really, by fleshing out all these scenarios and adding really complex characters and putting in the attention to small things like the ones we just mentioned, we give them an introduction to show that the world is really quite colorful and it's very complex. And we hope that that is what the readers can take away as they explore this book.
And Annie, before we go over what's next, could you tell our audience what the novel is about, more or less? You can do that a lot better than me.
Oh gosh, I don't want to give too much away because like my dad, I've gone through it several times, but I can say that you will find 4 very dynamic characters. They're tasked, of course, with an internship project, and the book kind of revolves around, well, what's going to happen? Are they going to nail that? Are they going to get a job offer? And there's a whole lot of other complex, just realistic scenarios that me and you would encounter in our everyday lives that these characters go through. I don't want to give it away, so you'll have to read to find out what happens.
Great, thank you. And what's next is we're gonna be using the book at St. Mary's University for sure. The what's next includes bringing the book up to the attention of other universities nationwide, talking to professional societies, the NSPE, National Society for Professional Engineers, but also Construction Management Association, the civil, the electrical, the mechanical engineers. They have a professional society and they recommend textbooks. So that's the goal. One of my students who was not taking the class, I was very pleased to see this, told me in the context of another conversation, he said, by the way, Dr. Moras, I'm on chapter 17 of your book. And I asked him, well, you're not in my class. Oh yeah, my friend gave it to me electronically. And I said, so what is chapter 17? And he described the chapter in detail, so I could tell he was reading the book. And then he said, when I finish, I would like to see if there's a sequel. Says we have prequels and sequels. I think you need a sequel. So maybe that's another item under the what's next category. Anyway, Annie, any final thoughts?
I think you covered it. I'm just excited to see other people pick up the book and give us our thoughts, give us their thoughts.
And here's a way to do it. The book was published on Amazon Kindle. It's an online book. It's available, and I think it's a good read. What can we tell you? Thank you so much for your attention. Please enjoy the rest of the talks in this Congreso. It's a very good event, an international event, and it was great being here with you.